Well, if you're wondering what a Bicinia was, that was one. So you're in the right place if that's what you came to hear. That was Caspar Othmar. His dates are 1515 to 1553. He was a Lutheran pastor and composer in Germany. And hopefully you caught the tune underneath, which was Luther's Vater Unser in Himmelreich, played by the horn. And this is my brother, Jeremy. So thanks to Jeremy for playing. He was 7 years behind me in school, and we never got to play together. So this has been really, really fun in the past couple of days. The slides are here. There's a bunch of musical scores and everything, too, with this QR code if you want to follow along. If you don't, that's fine. I'll have them, and I can send them or share the Dropbox with you later. So I'll give people a couple seconds to see if they can access. But then by way of introduction, I'm Michael Staub. I teach at Memorial Lutheran in Houston, Texas. I taught for 16 years in Houston before that as the traveling band guy, going through all the different schools. Then I taught 3 years at Concordia, Texas, and then last year was my first year back at Memorial, teaching a smorgasbord of things from kindergarten and first grade music to health and Greek and band. So, and this year I'm gonna do a little administration with Pastor Paul as well. So, there you go. All right. Well, so there's my family. I shouldn't skip over them too. Memorial has a special place in our heart. My wife and I met there, and my 3 girls all go to school at Memorial. And so we're very blessed by the place where we know that the Word of God is central to everything we do and have daily chapel and all of that. And so here's like kind of a roadmap of what we're going to do today in the presentation. How did I even come to look at Bicinia and of the early Reformation? How did I get there? Pedagogical principles from the collectors of these Bicinias, and then some of the main sources of Bicinia at that time and even a little bit later. And then where do you find these in modern notation? Because some of the older notation's a bit difficult to read. Most of you probably, even if you are a musician, probably wouldn't just look at that score. I wouldn't really either without translating it a bit. So where do you find this? We'll perform a little bit more for you, thanks to my musicians over here. And then some applications for today's Lutheran school. How can we use these? Part of our Lutheran heritage and tradition. We heard Mr. Rivers earlier talk about Bach, and this is a little bit earlier than Bach and kind of setting the stage for some of the things that Bach had done, but how can we use these in our Lutheran school? So starting with how did I get there, I with daily chapel in our schools, I wanted our students to be able to participate, our band students to be able to play in chapel on a regular basis and be a part of the worshiping life of the community, not just as a singing, but helping to lead the music and hopefully inspire them that someday when there are adult lay people or church musicians, that they already have some experience helping lead the service of the church. And Dr. Ullman has been very gracious to allow our instrumentals to play along with the organ. And then Fridays, on his day off, we have a little bit more freedom that we can do all kinds of things whenever he's not there. So,
well, I'm mowing the lawn.
There you go. So we have every week we have a hymn in chapel, and our theme hymn this year was Christ is the World's Redeemer. And so for every instrumentalist in the band, they got one of these booklets that had every single melodic line of the hymn. And so the melodic line's a really good place to start beforehand. Everyone's playing together. We heard from Miss Engel yesterday about all the musical theory things that we can teach from a Lutheran hymn, whether it be key signatures, rhythm, all kinds of things like that. So everyone gets this booklet like this. It has the text. I intentionally put the text there so that while they're playing, they can hear. I'm an instrumental person by nature, so this will be a little bit more instrumentally focused today. But I always want them to have that knowledge of what the text is as well. And a lot of them, I even have the other verses down below so that when they're not playing on a specific verse, they can sing. But as we went throughout the year, I wanted, trying to see and gauge where they are. I had some musicians that this is very easy for them. They can just look at this and they can sight read right through this. They can play along on the hymns, no problem. So what other things can we do as preludes or to adorn the worship of the community? And so that's when I started looking around, and that led me to the Bicinia collection. And so as I was looking, I stumbled upon this dissertation, an old dissertation from the 70s by Bruce Allen Bellingham. Basically, the title of our presentation today, The Bicinium in the Latin Schools During the Reformation Period. And so it's a wealth. It's like 500 and something pages long, 2 volumes. It's ridiculously well done, and it's a great source. And then as part of that, he even went on to publish some of these Bicinia that you can buy. But available by AR editions, you can buy some of those published ones. So a lot of the stuff that I'm presenting is that I'm borrowing from him, and then also talking about how we use it in our school. So a little bit of the historical grounding for where we are musically in the Reformation period. So the Reformation period that he's talking about in this dissertation is basically 1520 to 1560, roughly. That's where he is. So in 1525, John the Steadfast became the leader and dissolved the Hofkantorei. So this was of the church there. They sang over 1,000 masses per year, and all with professional musicians. And so when he disbanded that, there was a great shortage of musical expertise, and Luther even lamented, like, well, at least the papacy could sing, the papacy could sing. And so he lamented this loss of the expertise, and so this left a void in the musical service of the church and a void in the musical education, because those same people provided the education for the youth. And so Lutherans wanting to be a singing church, this was a problem. And so the next thing that we're going to talk about is the Latin schools developed new methods of how am I going to teach these students in the Latin school how to sing so that they can be of service in the church, and they're going to fill some of that void with the students in the Latin school. So, here's Bugenhagen on musical education. This is the Braunschweig School Ordinance of 1528. The 2 cantors in both schools are, upon the order of their rector, to do schoolwork, teaching like the other colleagues. Moreover, it is their special task, as Philip Melanchthon described it in the above-named book, that they teach all children, big and small, whether trained or not, to learn to sing ordinary melodies in German and Latin, but also figural music, not only according to custom by ear, but also gradually, artificially by sight, so that the children understand the solmization, syllables, pitch names, and what else belongs to such music, so that they learn to sing firmly and clearly. These are things that we do in our schools now. We learn solmization, we learn pitch names, we sing the hymns, and so we are following in the tradition of our forefathers in that way excellently. And so into the void of the Hofkanzlei being disbanded, came all of these school books on how to teach these students in the music schools. And so this is a quote from Bellingham from the dissertation about these new books. The new books, which are intended for use in Latin schools, had a purpose that differed fundamentally from most pre-Reformation treatises written for universities or cathedral schools. They were designed for practical use, not for philosophical speculation or for classroom instruction rather than private tutoring. Latin school music books were written to make students fluent in music as part of their general education, not to train professional musicians. Their authors were most necessarily more concerned with finding the most efficacious methods of imparting musical skills to children. So yesterday we heard about someone that can only play instruments or sing as being a slave, not knowing the knowledge behind it. And maybe this is fighting back against that just a tiny bit. Not that we still need the knowledge, but these guys everything was really practical. And so they set forth some pedagogical principles in their books. And so see what you think about these, and we'll revisit them at the end. So they said that this is talking in general terms over the books. Keep the rules simple and short. So if you look at these teaching books, a lot of them are going to be much shorter. They're designed for beginners, so when they're talking about the rules, obviously some of the rules there, you'll see a chart. Anyone have a wager on what that's teaching?
Note values?
Yeah, note value. So they're moving away from chant notation and into actual rhythmic notation at this time. And so they use pictorial aids there as well. As good Lutherans, they use dialogical catechetical teaching, asking questions. This is modeled after Melanchthon. Melanchthon was big on that, using question back and forth. Obviously, many other early books were like that as well. And so they did some of this in their books as well. And they also utilized practical examples and that the students could rehearse repeatedly. And that's where the majority of this presentation is going to go, on these practical examples, because they have very short amount of rules and then lots of examples where the students could practice. And then they also had the admonition to use the best possible music. So what this resulted in was, at the beginning, these collections by Lutheran composers and collectors has a lot of Catholic music, Roman Catholic, because that's all there was, right? So Luther loved Josquin, as a lot of you know, and so you're going to see Josquin represented in some of these. You're going to see a lot of if you look at the earlier collections, it's a lot of Roman Catholic collections. And then as we get later, which is the ones that I like to use more often, then we have a lot more of our Lutheran hymns and tunes that we know. So in the books, you're going to find several different kind of examples. You'll find their practical examples. You'll find plain chant melodies. You'll find simple contrapuntal pieces with very simple counterpoint between them. You'll find lots of canons, and you'll find polyphonic motet-like pieces, which would be something more like along the lines of Josquin, that sort of thing. So the first of our books is by Sabel Hayden, and I'm probably pronouncing the German horribly, 1499 to 1561. It's called Die Arte Candende. We're not actually going to hear an example from this, but his quote here about canons, I think, is really helpful. Since I knew right well that it would be scarcely possible to find everywhere altos, tenors, and basses, so they are commonly called, suited to sing examples for 4 different parts, I thus formed the plan, because of the inadequacy of singers, of using here such examples as could be sung by boys of the same age among themselves. Of such a kind are those songs in which 2 or 3 voices follow each other in turn at fixed intervals out of a single line of notes, which are commonly called fuga, or we would call them canons today. And so you see why they came up with Bicinia as a thing that anyone should even use, and canons, because they're simple. If you do a canon, everyone can sing it the same together in unison first, and then after they are familiar with it and they know it, a couple people could break off, the stronger singers, and sing against the people that already have it. Or with Bicinia, you only have 2 parts that you have to worry about versus the 4 parts or 6 parts, or some of the intricate music that had multiple parts. So as they're training the young children, they simplify it a little bit more by only having 2 parts to worry about at a time. So after, a little bit later on, we have Heinrich Faber, and his book is called the Compendium Musicae, and it was the most widely used beginning textbook in Lutheran Latin schools during the Reformation period. And there's a chart in the dissertation with all these schools listed out. All the schools were basically using this book, and it's a very short volume. It's only like 40 pages or something. And the first 15 or so are the rules, and then all the rest is examples for practical use. And so he says, I've gathered this handbook of rules with the addition of a rather large number of examples without which these principles by themselves do not bring result. So he was very insistent that they need to practice. They can't just learn the rules and then know what to do. They have to practice it over and over. So we have this repetition as a part of classical education, right? Repeating things over and over again. And so this was part of what they were doing as well. For the benefit of the boys committed to my trust. Some of the artwork on some of these things is really interesting as well. And you'll see that in the link to the Dropbox folder, it has all the complete volumes of all the originals of these books in PDF because they're freely available online. You can just download them. And just a little bit about Faber. He was born in Bavaria, employed as a singer in the court of Christian II of Denmark. He later lectured in Wittenberg, and he's mostly known for this compendium of books. So we're going to play one of his Bicinia from this one. And this one is super simple. So this is you. So Thomas Allman is here. He's one of my students at Memorial, heading into our high school at Memorial. And this is a very simple one. This would have probably been used to teach intervals. It's a super simple canon. So you'll hear me start, and Thomas is just going to echo what I did 4 beats later. And I use this as a sight reading exercise for my guys. It doesn't have any text. It's textless, but it's good for sight reading, and it's pretty simple. And then also, I mean, you could use it to teach solfege because it's fairly simple in that regard as well, although it's a little modal, so that, but that's the way I use it in the school. So, ready? 2, ready? So super simple, designed as a teaching piece to help them learn. I mean, they had a little bit different solemnization system, and there's some things where they have there's one example of like 7 different solemnization ways that they have of doing solfege for a specific one. But I use it as a sight reading exercise in this case. And obviously there's more. I'm just touching on a tiny little portion of each of these books. The next book is by Erasmus Rotenbucher. It is called the Diphona Amina et Florida. And his dedication quote, this is a quote from the dedication of that book. We observe that all the most excellent musical composers, if they are striving to give some special pleasure to their listeners, or make some special passage stick more deeply in their minds, even in music involving several parts, seek to achieve these aims in apt pairing of only 2 voices, in which there is always more genuine force and melodious pleasure than in that indiscriminate roaring crowd of voices, which, however, also has its own place and appropriate manner. So he's arguing here for the Bicinia, the 2 voices. And so this is an example from Rotenbucher, this next one. And so he used this as a teaching exercise for rhythmic training is what it says in the dedication above it. But then he also put a contrafact to it, and the text is to the right. So he's learning musical rhythm, quite involved, but he's also has a biblical text to go along with it. So we're just going to play a snippet of this one. because it's fairly long and we didn't have a lot of time to rehearse. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Thomas. Then probably one of the most well-known collections was by Georg Grau. We already heard that name today. Mr. Rivers quoted Luther's dedication of a different book of his, but he had 2 different collections of Bicinia, and he has Bicinia in multiple languages. There's Latin and German. And these are a collection of all different kinds of composers, and they're existing duos from other composers. So none of these are his compositions, but they're all just collections of other people that he used as supplements to Heinrich Faber's book. So as another collection of examples for the students to play and sing along. So we're going to hear an example. This is from a choir in Leipzig. And what they did with Herzlich tut mich, my German is terrible, but the tune by Walter. So you're going to hear this. Whoops. There we go. And so this is what the original music would have looked like. This is only one part of it. They had it in 2 separate part books. So this is the top part that you heard the recorder playing. The students were singing the other one. So all that really happened there in that recording was this: they did the same thing 3 times in a row in 3 different ways, right? They had the instruments play the first time in a duet with the instruments, in a Bicinia with the instruments. Then the second time they had the students sing the bottom part and the recorder play the top part. And then the third time they did the same thing, except it was a soloist on the bottom and the recorder on the top. And so this is a simple way that you can use original Lutheran music in a very, very pretty easy way, because this top part could be played by a professional, or you as a music educator, or someone in your community that knows how to play, and the kids could easily learn how to sing. I mean, you can listen to the recording. They could easily learn how to sing it. And so this is one easy way that you could adopt these for use in your school. The next example, so that was from Rau's collection with a tune by Walther. And then the next one, this example is from Joskin. And this is from a motet with 6 voices, but there's a separate section in the middle of the motet that's only 2 voices. And so Rao actually took all of these from these motets. There's 4 different ones, I think, that Joskin has where it reduces down to only 2 voices on a separate section of the motet. And so they stole these and put it in a collection. And so this is the whole motet, which is wonderful, but we're not going to listen to the whole thing. I'll fast forward until the part that we need. So obviously a little bit more involved, a little bit more difficult in Latin, but beautiful music. And so you could see why Luther recommended Joskin, why these collectors of Bicinia collected those pieces, because they're beautiful. They're beautiful music. And so maybe a little bit more difficult to use in our school, but maybe as exposure to what the genre is for your students before you sing something like the previous one. So this gives you a little bit of a flavor for what's in Rao's set of Bicinia. So a great variety there as well. Sorry, there we go. So where do we find these? Where can you get these? They're really easily available. I heard someone else talking about this already, but almost all of the stuff that I played was either taken from Choral Public Domain Library, cpdl.org, or imslp.org, and all of it's free. So all that stuff is free. You can just download it. A lot of times, and I can show this at the end if people are interested, but a lot of times they even have it, they have it in PDF, or they have it for us musicians, they have it in finale format. So then you can adjust it to whatever, because some of these I've messed with keys, I've transposed for instruments and all those sorts of things, and I just had to click a couple buttons and do it, and it was really easy. And then we can play Lutheran music right away. So it's really fun. You also have all kinds of, I talked about the Bellingham edition before, which was from AR Editions. Jack's Pipes and Hammers is a UK with lots of other early music as well. And then the American Recorder Society, it's a pretty small fee to pay to be a part of that, and they have tons of music that's downloadable of early music like this, of which some of these Lutheran Bicinia are available. And I'm hoping to start a recorder consort at school so that we can do some of this with recorders as well. There's lots of music like that, and so that's another way that maybe you could do it in your school as well. Now I want to look ahead. So those were Reformation period, primarily books and collections of practical examples, but I want to look ahead just a little bit because these are teaching books and collections further after the Reformation. So a lot of these contain more tunes that we're familiar with and more theology that is more in line with what's going on as well. The Gumpelsheimer, we're going to hear a piece by him in just a minute. His collection is all canons, and it's awesome. Some of them very involved, but some of them very accessible. We're going to hear Vater unser im Himmelreich again, but with Gumpelsheimer's canon of it in canon form, which is really ingenious, his way of doing that. And then like as late as 1642, so we're getting almost to the time of Bach, right? And Friderici has, his aren't so much melodies that we would be familiar with, but they're based on the church year. And so like every set of the church year has a Latin, and they're all in Latin. So those of you that really like to sing in Latin, they're 2-part settings in Latin for all the different times in the church year. So, and not crazy difficult. And again, you could adapt it to have an instrument play one voice and singers play another voice, and you have a very simple arrangement then to sing at all different festivals of the year. So a couple more for your listening. We already played the Othmeyer setting of Vater Unser, but now we're going to play the Gumpelsheimer of the same one. And you have a score of this in the folder with the slides, and it has the text on it. We're playing from a textless version right now, but it has the text there, so you could sing this with the, I think it's the German text on this one. No worries, you've been cold. And I put him on the spot. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So that's a really interesting setting, fairly simple. You can practice it all together first and then go back and try to put it in canon, or have one instrument play while the voices sing, or have two instruments as a prelude. Not long, but preserving our Lutheran heritage, as Mr. Rivers talked about, and tunes that we're familiar with. The kids know these. It's very devotional for the kids as they enter chapel. Instead, as they come in, they can hear a tune that we're singing that week or whatever, and they can start thinking about the text that they already have memorized or that they're working on memorizing while they're getting ready for chapel to start. And then a little bit later on, Praetorius. Obviously, he's one of the most well-known Lutheran composers prior to Bach, and he has a great wealth of music, and he has a few Bicinia in his collection as well. And these are choral pieces. They have choral text to them. I've used them a lot with my more advanced instrumentalists as preludes for chapel, just with instruments. But we'll play one of those for you now. We'll go slow. 1, 2, 3. He had it perfect before, I promise you. So obviously Luther's Confession hymn as that we are familiar with, and there's several others of those praetorius compositions as well that easily lend themselves to arrangement for instruments. A little bit more difficult, obviously, as you can tell, the counting a little bit more intricate, a little bit more independent, so a little bit more difficult for students to do. But again, you could have the students learn one part, an instrument play another part, or you could have help and support from instruments for two parts, depending on the how advanced your singers are as well. So as we revisit now the pedagogical principles, what do you think of them? How do these pedagogical principles look to us today? Do we like to keep things simple for our students so that they can understand? Do we use pictorial aids? Do we ask questions to try to impart the knowledge to our students and get a discussion going back and forth to see whether they really know? Do we utilize practical examples to help reinforce the concepts? I think a lot of us do that no matter what subjects we're teaching. And use the best possible music. So maybe we're not using Bicinia in your school, but select music that's really appropriate to your students. If you use canons, maybe we're not using these canons that are more intricate rhythmically, but use a canon that's really helpful, that's really good music that people would want to listen to. So just a little bit of how I see this being done in a Lutheran school. It could reinforce your Latin. A lot of these have Latin text available. So have your Latin teacher help with pronunciation. And then you can use Latin while you're singing in chapel, which is awesome. We like to use them in performance in chapel or for church as preludes. You could also use them as a concert setting, as you saw with the German choir from Leipzig. I like to use them as sight reading examples because especially the Renaissance music, it's rare. They have the ties across the bar line. They have lots of dotted notes, things that at least my students struggle with. And so these are good examples for them to use to work on their counting, to get a little bit better at that. It's also a great way to expose students to earlier music. So our students, for the most part, don't know music they barely know Mozart and Bach, and you go back farther than that, and they have no idea. And so this is one way to expose them to that a little bit. And then maybe we, as an encouragement, this was happening right after the Reformation, right? They were overjoyed, and Mr. Rivers talked about this as well. They were overjoyed by the theology, they were overjoyed by the message, and all of these compositions happened. And we look at Bach's output and all the compositions. So encourage composition in your own school, and commission compositions based on Lutheran hymnody so that we can continue passing our tradition on, whether it's in Bicinia form or not, but so that we can pass down our tradition to the next generation. And there's the reference list of everything, the Bellingham dissertation at the top, and then all of the books and all those PDF of all the original sources are in that Dropbox as well. And then special thanks to Thomas Allman for playing, my brother, Jeremy Staub, teacher at Wittenberg Academy, Pastor Paul, a little bit of help with the Latin. I am not a Latin scholar. I need to work on that. It's one of the things that I need to do in my continuing learning, but all the books are in Latin. So if you are a Latin scholar, you'll be able to read them much better than I. And you can maybe tell me that I didn't know what I was talking about. Because Pastor Paul's translation was a little bit better than Google Translate. So, and if you have questions, or if you want to talk more about it, I'd be happy to talk with you. And my email's up there if you'd like me to send you the slides or share the Dropbox link with you or whatever. But I'm happy to take any questions. I think we have a couple minutes.
Yes. So how would you define Bicinia?
So early on it was defined as a composition for two voices. But now and mostly it was centered around Germany. So we have like the ricercare, I can never pronounce that, but in Italy with two voices, which is kind of the same. But this was basically centered around Germany, and now it's come to be known also for things for two instruments. So it could be for two voices or for two instruments. Yeah, and it's basically the trio sonata came out of this because you have the two voices on top, and then it had the bass that eventually added underneath. So this is like leading to the Baroque trio sonata, basically. So this is a predecessor of that. Yes.
Do we see later examples of composers writing in this earlier style? Someone like Hugo Dissler? Are there others that are fitting in kind of his mold as he's looking back to stuff from this era?
Good question. I don't know. But I'm still early in my exploration of it. It basically started, I don't know, midway through this year. And I started looking at it, and I just keep going down to other rabbit holes. And so I haven't gone down that one yet. But I've taken it more from a practical angle of how can I use this with my students at the school. So.
Are you composing new ones for hymns they might not have covered?
I am not. That is not my strength or forte, but I should. But I always know that I'll get a good question from Scott. Yes.
How did you get interested in early music and in using it in class?
I mean, basically, it started out of trying to find something for my students to do in chapel. And I was looking for things because I have a few number of students that are, let's say, more advanced that can handle that type of counting that some of this would be. And so I was looking for something that they could use that was based on Lutheran hymns or theologically based that we could use in chapel. And so then I just kind of like stumbled upon it and then just keep exploring and arranging them or transcribing them for my students. Well, thank you all very much.